This is Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer on the Senate floor. Following a Saturday session, Thune discussed the pending nominations of Scott Bessent to be Treasury Secretary and former Congressman Sean Duffy to be Transportation Secretary on January 27th. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, later today we will hold a vote on the nomination of Scott Bessent to be Treasury Secretary. An example of the American dream in action, Mr. Bessent rose from challenging economic circumstances to a career in the world of finance. And he brings a wealth of private sector experience in the economy and markets to his new role, as well as a concern for the needs of working Americans. Mr. President, during President Trump's first administration, we passed major tax relief legislation. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act reformed our nation's outdated tax code, lowered tax rates across the board, nearly doubled the standard deduction, doubled the child tax credit, and enacted pro-growth policies for American businesses of all sizes. As a result, the economy took off, and our nation became more competitive. Household incomes increased, and the employment rate hit its lowest level in 50 years. Now, however, a lot of that tax relief is close to expiring. And without action, American families and businesses will face a staggering $4 trillion tax hike next year. And at the top of the Republican agenda is extending that tax relief to help our economy and the American people thrive. I deeply appreciate the fact that Mr. Bessent shares that commitment, and I'm looking forward to working with him on extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. I'm also looking forward to working with him to help ensure that American businesses, large and small, remain competitive in the global economy. Over the last 4 years, we've witnessed the Biden administration's embrace, the Biden administration embrace the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development and negotiate with nations around the world on a Pillar 2 global minimum tax regime. All, I might add, without consulting Congress. And I would argue without fully appreciating the damage to the United States' own tax base and our ability to set tax policy for U.S. multinational firms. The Tax Cuts and Jobs Act helped create an environment where American businesses could thrive on the global stage. And I'm committed to working with Mr. Bessent and the Trump administration to continue to protect American businesses and ensure that we do not enter into agreements that put U.S. businesses at a disadvantage next to their foreign counterparts. Mr. President, this afternoon we will also be voting to invoke cloture on the nomination of Sean Duffy to be Secretary of Transportation. Mr. Duffy brings valuable experience that will help him in managing our nation's sprawling transportation system, and he has some important work ahead of him. In recent years, there have been a number of challenges in the transportation sector. We've seen serious safety concerns affect air travel. Issues at our ports have led to supply chain challenges. A pilot shortage has resulted in reduced air service in parts of the country. And all the while, the Biden administration seemed to be focused on forcing Americans into electric vehicles and forcing progressive ideology into transportation policy. Mr. President, the American people expect to have a safe and efficient transportation system, and that's the top priority of the Transportation Department. And it's what Sean Duffy is focused on. As a 5-term congressman and a co-chair of the Great Lakes Task Force, Mr. Duffy worked with Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate on a number of infrastructure projects, including the replacement of a decades-old structurally deficient bridge connecting Wisconsin and Minnesota and upgrading the Sioux locks. Our colleague, Senator Baldwin, has called Mr. Duffy, and I quote, the right person for this job, and he earned a unanimous bipartisan vote out of the Commerce Committee last week. Mr. President, as Mr. Duffy mentioned during his confirmation hearing, he and his wife, Rachel, have 9 children. And I'm not the first to observe that the logistics of moving the Duffy clan is by itself preparation for this job. But more seriously, Mr. President, as a father and the parent of new drivers, transportation safety is personal to Mr. Duffy. And as a resident of a rural state myself, I appreciate that coming from rural Wisconsin, he knows the infrastructure needs in rural parts of the country are just as important as those anywhere else. Mr. President, Sean Duffy will bring valuable experience and knowledge to the Transportation Department, and he has a proven track record of working with Republicans and Democrats to deliver good infrastructure for the people we all serve. I look forward to working with him in this new role, and I look forward to confirming both Mr. Bessent and Mr. Duffy in the very near future.
Schumer discussed egg prices, President Trump's having fired inspectors general, pardons for January 6th insurrectionists, nominations and Holocaust Remembrance Day.
Madam President, I want to open with a few words on the announcement from China by DeepSeek. Today's announcement from China has been called AI's Sputnik moment for America. This announcement is precisely why I made AI a top priority in the last Congress and will continue to do so. Our competitors are going to use every single opportunity to overtake the United States' lead on the technologies of the future, particularly AI. And if Congress does not lead the way, we're going to fall behind. So I hope our bipartisan efforts on AI, which made some progress last year, will continue and even in a more robust way this year. Next, on the price of eggs. Earlier today, I was in upstate New York at two beloved family-owned diners, Alton's near Buffalo and Gines in Rochester, to call for an all-hands-on-deck approach to stop the spread of bird flu and prevent higher egg prices. For too many families across New York and across the country, far too many, have been shell-shocked by higher egg prices as more bird flu outbreaks continue to happen. But so far, it seems President Trump has not enunciated any plan to address the bird flu outbreak. He spent his first week pardoning insurrectionists, firing government watchdogs, instead of focusing on things ordinary Americans care about, like the price of groceries. The president owes the American people some answers. What is he going to do about the price of eggs that's been exacerbated by bird flu? When hundreds of thousands and even millions of chickens die, they lay fewer eggs. And when there are fewer eggs, the price goes up. The problem's reaching crisis levels. In November, a dozen eggs cost approximately $4 at a grocery store in New York, already too high. It used to be $2 a year earlier. Now, that same dozen eggs costs $6. And experts believe that the price of eggs could increase as much as 20% more this year if outbreaks continue, meaning that the same dozen eggs would be $8. Every day we hear about the spread of bird flu. Last week, farmers on Long Island had to slaughter 100,000 ducks. Long Island's one of the duck-producing capitals of the country, in response to another outbreak. So, President Trump, what's your plan to stop the spread of bird flu? The more bird flu spreads, the higher egg prices will go, and the less money in people's pockets for rent and gas and other expenses. We need some action. Now, luckily, we have some resources available. Last year, I helped secure over $300 million in federal funding ahead of the new administration to keep the government laser-focused on ending the bird flu crisis. And should the $300 million prove insufficient, I'll keep working in a bipartisan way to push for more federal resources in the upcoming budget negotiation. One thing is certain, we have a lot of budget cutters out there, none with a sharper axe than Russell Vought. The Trump administration and Mr. Vought should not try to impound these congressional-approved funds, because we know Mr. Vought wants to impound in many, many places and not spend money that's needed. And this is a small but classic example of how the federal government's action, not inaction, can get your prices lower. Real action, spending the $300 million that we put in the budget in December, and more funds if needed, can reduce bird flu. Department of Agriculture knows how to do it, can help farmers reduce the bird flu in their flocks, and get our prices of eggs back down again. Let's get to work. The money is there and ready to be used. We need the federal government to work overtime with experts in the coming months to keep the outbreak in check and keep grocery prices in check for families. Now on the IGs. Last Friday, while most Americans were asleep, President Trump conducted a midnight massacre of many of the federal government's nonpartisan, independent watchdogs. The president did not notify the Congress of his decision, as is required by law. The president did not offer any substantive explanation for these firings. Instead, the president simply said these positions were, quote, terminated effective immediately. This is a chilling, potentially unlawful decision by the president. It's a reminder that if there's anything President Trump fears most, it's accountability. He likes to talk about one thing and then another, and then doesn't like to be held accountable. When people stand up to President Trump, when people present him with facts and evidence that he doesn't like, his solution is to fire them and replace them with loyalists. I fear that this is what will happen here. Purging the government of its independent watchdogs begs an obvious question. What is the president trying to hide? What does the president not want the American people to see? Does the president want to avoid accountability for impoundment of congressional-approved funding? Does he want to hold up foreign aid as blackmail without getting caught? Does he want to eliminate scrutiny of improper government contracts? An independent inspector general could prevent many of these abuses. An inspector general's job can be boiled down to two words: transparency and accountability. That is what President Trump is apparently afraid of. But it's something most Americans want to have in their government. January 6th. For all the talk President Trump does about standing up for law and order, he spent the first few days in office doing the opposite, pardoning lawless rioters who invaded the Capitol and attacked police officers on January 6th. Today, I'm joining all 47 of my Senate Democratic colleagues in introducing a resolution condemning the pardon of individuals who were found guilty of assaulting Capitol police officers on January 6th. Senator Murray will seek passage of this resolution this week. I hope our Republican colleagues join us in condemning these pardons. Many of them saw the violence of January 6th firsthand. I did. This should be an easy resolution to pass. By handing out these pardons to convicted criminals, President Trump is effectively saying, you want to attack our brave police officers? That's okay, you're exonerated. The president is saying, you want to try and thwart our democracy? Fine by me. The president is saying, want to break the law and engage in political violence? Be my guest. One individual who received a pardon, listen to this, one individual who received a pardon was convicted of seditious conspiracy. A few days after the attack, he said, quote, his only regret is that they should have brought rifles, unquote. That man is being pardoned. What a disgrace. To repeat, his only regret is that they should have brought rifles, and President Trump pardoned him? Who could believe that? Who could believe in America that would happen? A few years back, no one would even imagine it. That's in some ways how our country has deteriorated, with President Trump doing what he's doing. The people who invaded the Capitol on January 6th, whether they engaged in violence or not, committed a very serious crime. There's no gray area here, especially not when it comes to people who attack police officers. The pardons must be condemned by the Senate, and Democrats will try to do that through our resolution this week. On nominations, this week, 3 of the president's most controversial nominees will testify before Senate committees: Kash Patel, Tulsi Gabbard, and Robert Kennedy, Jr. All 3 nominees have deeply troubling backgrounds and equally troubling views. If Pete Hegseth's nomination process was any indication, these controversial nominees can expect to face immense scrutiny from both sides of the aisle and from the American people. Americans deserve to know, will the Trump administration strengthen our health and security or strengthen big drug companies and pseudoscience? Mr. Kennedy's hearing will give us answers. Also, we have to know from Mr. Kennedy, does he want to eliminate life-saving vaccines that have saved the lives and the health of so many millions of children in the United States and around the globe? Americans also deserve to know, will the FBI focus on public safety and rule of law or focus on Donald Trump's personal grievances? Mr. Patel and his hearing will give us answers. Americans need to know, will the Trump administration protect us from foreign adversaries and deal in truth and facts when it comes to classified intelligence? If there is ever a need for a fact-based agency, it's the intelligence agencies which gather information that keep us safe. Or will these agencies be turned to give shelter to conspiracy and misinformation in our intelligence? Ms. Gabbard's hearing will give us some very important answers here. The people entrusted to oversee matters of public health and law enforcement and classified intelligence should be beyond reproach. Their qualifications should not be in doubt. But President Trump has seemed to choose 3 deeply unqualified, deeply untrustworthy individuals to these positions. Like Mr. Hegseth, it's hard to imagine that they're the best for the job or even close to it. Holocaust Remembrance Day. Today is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. We commemorate it because it was the 80th anniversary of the liberation of the few Jews who survived and were imprisoned at Auschwitz. Never again can we allow anti-Semitism or any other form of hatred to fester and grow the way we saw during the Nazi regime. We must always tell the truth about what happened to the Jewish people 80 years ago. We can never allow history to be forgotten, shunned, or deliberately erased. It saddens me this year. Holocaust Remembrance Day comes at a time of rising hatred against Jewish people, especially here in America after October 7th. Just yesterday, I visited a popular Israeli restaurant a few blocks from my home in Brooklyn. It's called Miriam. The night before, the restaurant and its owners were the victims of a despicable act of vandalism. Their windows were smeared with red paint and defiled with messages of hate. The attack happened simply because the owners are Jewish. Just because the owners are Jewish. That is anti-Semitism, pure and simple, and we must condemn it together, forcefully. As ugly as this incident was, I was inspired by how the owners of the community and the community responded. They chose to leave the vandalism up for a day so that people in the media could see the dangers of letting anti-Semitism gain strength. Many in the area stopped by for lunch, offered to help with the cleanup, or just shared in a message of support. I went and visited the restaurant in the evening with an order to go. That is the best, that is New York at its best, when these neighbors look after each other in the face of hate. We must never, never fail to condemn anti-Semitism wherever or whenever it rears its ugly head. It comes now in many new dimensions. Some people seem impervious to things that seem to many Jewish people outright anti-Semitic. We have to be so vigilant. That's the best way to honor what Holocaust Remembrance Day represents.
Thanks for listening to this FedNet podcast, and be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited.